trying to deal with the Unit 5, as some people have asked me about Unit 5. Unit 5 is the easiest unit in the entire enterprise networking syllabus. And as I told you, there are only 3 chapters inside this. In fact, Unit 4 we need to try dealing with more, because there are many chapters in Unit 4, but they are easier chapters barring from the thing. So if you see Unit 4, you have got IPv4, IPv6, and the routing protocols inside this, and also your OSPF, BGP, route manipulation, and IP multicast basically. So if I try understanding all these kind of details, these are very simpler. The point of view of contention would be the header files of Internet Protocol version 4 and version 6. Kindly go through all your kind of addressing formats, and how is the design of an IPv4 addressing system has been there, and what is NAT inside IPv4, and what is IPv6 kind of differences between IPv4 and IPv6, the header formats, the kind of the protocols, and between the neighbor discovery protocol or name resolution, how these things are being working out. And the routing protocols are easier. You can just go through all the routing protocols and how are the metrics and all those kind of thing happening. You can try concentrating on all that. Coming back to your chapter, Unit 5, first chapter, chapter number 12. As I told you, there are 3 chapters. That is chapter 12, chapter 13, and your last chapter would be chapter 15. There is no chapter 14 over there. So as the thing tries to give you the reference over here, you can understand it, that what are we trying to deal with inside your Unit 5. Unit 5 tries dealing with mainly your kind of thing called as your security, convergence, and network management. So these 3 are the keys to understand what is Unit 5. So any questions would deal with security, your convergence, and your kind of network management. So in our syllabus, we are mostly dealing on security and network management. So these 2 things we can manage. So your chapter starts with, your unit starts with chapter 12, and if you can see, we have started with managing your security, and the first topic, what are we trying to deal with, is nothing but your kind of network security overview. So if you can try seeing the network security overview, and you can understand over here, this would be the part where we are trying to understand about why we need to have security in a network. And as the time going on, as the networks are growing, if we can see how the size and complexity of the attacks are increased. So the idea of telling you the initial part is to give you an overview that why there should be a requirement of your security in a network. So the answers would be that, oh, we need to have a high availability and resilience infrastructure, preventing unauthorized access intrusion, and protecting the end users, ensuring the data confidentialities. And the next part, if you can try seeing it, the next part, the author tries to put it that if you want to security, is that the solution to stop everything? No, the security is not to stop everything, but security is to make the network transparent, but also provide blocking to your external attackers, permitting access only to the users, preventing attacks from the sourcing. So this is a way we need to answer these kind of questions when we have been asked about what is the important reason why we need to have a security in our network. So idea is not to tell that we need to stop everything. The idea is to make the network transparent and also have the authorized access onto it. The chapter also deals with security legislation, and then we went on going on to your kind of thing called as security threats. the any time when you are being confused, okay, what is the topic and what are the top subtopics, you should can always go on to your index, which is very clearly describing the kind of topics and subtopics. So if I try seeing here we are having your network security. If you can see, so when you try understanding your the topics over here, we have got these kind of thing called as network security overview. So if you can see, in the network security overview, we are having security legislation, your threats. In under your threats, we are having 3 points called as reconnaissance, port scanning, vulnerability scanners, and unauthorized access. Under security risk, we have 3 points, that is your targets, loss of availability, integrity violation, and confidentiality breaches. So if you are a student and are accessing that, how these questions would be finding out, you can be asked about any kind of security threats or any one kind of security threats or security risk or security policies, or process or trust and identity management, or what are the secure services available inside, or you can have secure threat defense. These are the important topics inside this chapter. So when you try understanding about your security threats, there are 3 points inside security threats. Now, what are the risks and threats? Threats basically are certain kind of threats which we try seeing that how people scan your kind of system. So here more on scanning, how people try taking vulnerabilities inside your kind of system. That is more on. So all the tools which scans all these kind of system, we will be trying to understand over here inside your security threat. So in your reconnaissance, if you have seen, there would be n number of mapping over here, if you can check. So when you try seeing over here, we are trying to understand about different types of scanners tools basically. So if I go on, there are tools called as nmap, there are tools called as netscan tools, netstumbler, and all that stuff. So by these, the kind of attackers try taking your kind of access onto your things. So vulnerability scanners are different over here. So if you can see your vulnerability scanners over here, and we try seeing over here that what are the vulnerability scanners over here, there are different types of vulnerability scanners inside your security threats. So here basically, how are the kind of attackers going to take your kind of important data or scan your data? That is what is we are trying to deal with, the unauthorized access or vulnerability scanners or reconnaissance and port scanning. That is important for us. And security risks, if you're understanding, we said that what are the risks. Risks are making sure that you get uninterrupted access. Your system should be available. The data should be protected. So data is at risk. Your system is at risk. The confidentiality of your data is at risk. So how you can protect this? That is the point what we are trying to see that. So what are the targets for attackers are your infrastructure, your routers, your security devices, your DNS servers. These are at risk, your infrastructure. And what would happen, you should understand that in your network, what would happen if I'm not having a server is compromised. If you remember, I told you an example that I'm okay with losing my firewall, I'm okay with losing my switches, but I'm not okay with my domain server where the actual data is being there. So for my network, I need to understand what is the loss of availability would cost me for. So you need to try understanding those kind of things. Specifically, what are we trying to deal with, basic kind of thing. So in your security risk, we are trying to understand about your system availability, the targets, and your loss of availability and integrity violation. And integrity violation, that's what we can try dealing with, where we are accessing your VLANs separate, you're restricting your access to your OS, limiting the user by accessing user profiles, giving user profiles, and using different type of encryption techniques. So when you try dealing with all these things, friends, this is what we try doing inside your security risk. Then there are certain kind of policies what we need to try dealing with. So what are the policies per se? You try understanding that policies are nothing but the restrictions, the rules and regulations which in your network which you put, basically. So that's what is security policies and process. Now you can define the security policies by saying what are the business requirements, what is associated risk and cost, what policy governs these kind of things. So if you have seen the topics in security policies, you can try understanding dealing with the topics range from the policies defined to your continuous security, to your integrating security, to your risk assessment and risk index. So clearly here we need to define the policies properly and the rules and regulations properly, and it would be only be defined when we try understanding to about your network and what are the business requirement, associate risk costs, policy governance. So based on all these kind of thing, this diagram deals with like network security life cycle. Then you can try understanding the best approach for your security policy. What are the policies defined? Like for example, in your TY Internet, I have created a policy for TY IT, TY BWalk and all that, because everyone's usage is different, everyone's timing is different. So based on that, I have formulated a policy basically inside my firewall. So here also we are trying to deal with that. What are we getting to protect? What are determine what you're trying to protect it from? All those kind of thing. Purpose of security policies, that's again your theory, you can understand these things. What are the security policy components, that again you can understand about, is that how we are trying to do the risk management policies basically, and how are we going to handle it in your enterprise. So if you can see here, we try understand over here the specific areas of risk management. So where in your risk management areas we need to deal with. So in your risk management, if you remember, we tried understanding about topics called as risk index mainly. So when you try to understand the assessment of the risks, we can have to understand the severity of the risks. So in my case, my domain server is more risky because it's where my entire data is being stored. It's not my firewall. Firewall have got a backup in everything, but my basic assessment of my network risk is my domain server, where the actual data is being stored. So risk assessment gives me three major components. That's what we tried understanding. That is control, security, that is severity, and probability. So these assessments we need to try understanding, and it's a self-explanatory kind of topic if you can deal with. And based on it, you need to give you the risk of index. And here the author tries to put up different thing, like a DOS attack gives you a severity of 2, probability of 2, control of 1. So based on it, we got a formula to understand that the DOS attack has got a risk index of 4 basically. So it will allow us to understand if a security is having a ransomware attack, what is the severity of the risk. So we can say that. And if you have seen my firewall report, if you can see, it gives me severity that it was a high risk or a medium risk or a low risk kind of attack, and based on that you can take your actions onto it. These are the kind of topics what we are trying to deal with. The risk index, continuous security, the next important topics, if you can see here, is trust and identity management, and your secure services and threat defense. These are all the topics which will deal with how are you going to identify your user, and how are you going, which all your domains you're going to trust. Because in your apps also, you try downloading the trusted apps only, basically. So which are domains you will trust when they are accessing your network, or how are you going to do an identity management, how are you going to protect, or what would be your defense mechanism in understanding or protecting or defending, putting a defense against the attack. How are you going to protect your infrastructure, and what are the services, software services, through which you can encrypt your data. So these three topics, you can have your understanding of how these kind of things can be protected. So if you can see different type of attacks we have tried seeing over here in the trust and identity management. So we are trying, the diagrams are important, as I told you, that what is a trust and what are the domains of trust, what we are trying to deal with. How are you going to identify the kind of user, whether you're going to, it depends on the severity of the things. Some use passwords. If you remember, I told some of the network use passwords, some of them use pin numbers, some of them use token cards, some of them use retina scanners, some of them use certificates. So there are different types. In certificates, there are different types of certificates you can have, as a public key and a private key. Some people just give a public key, some people have both public and private. Remember, certificates, I told you about example of how Gmail is our thing, or email ID is a public key, but the password to our email ID is a private key. So you need to try having both public and a private key as your kind of security. Uh, when we come down to your secure services, these are all the protocols and the security services we are trying to deal with. We are trying to deal with your kind of transmission confidentialities. I told you that there are physical security, how I'm going to protect myself. So if you can see your physical security, how are we going to protect the unauthorized access to your kind of physical access system, basically your IT assets, which are important. How are we going to protect ourselves from the vulnerabilities, attackers who try dealing with your hardware, your network attacks? So how are you going to keep a defense on when you are having your network and there are maximum number of roaming users? So I don't know who is an attacker and who is my user over here. So if you can try understanding these parts, this is a kind of, you can explain it on your own, that how I'm going to put up a UPS units, how I'm going to use retina scanners, and all those kind of, how cryptography I can use. So these are the defense mechanism how I can use it. How I'm going to protect my infrastructure. These are all these kind of examples what I'm trying to deal with, and what is the security management solutions I'm trying to provide. So if you can see the security management solutions, there are different types of security, like collect and interpret present information, provision network security policies for deployment. So how are you going to protect and give the solutions for security management? That is important. You have to take the logs of every time, you have to check your firewall every time, you have to see what are the number of attacks, what are the severity of attacks, and try dealing with changing the passwords, changing the kind of user access profile.